They handed her a rusty toolkit and pointed to the back corner of the training facility. No introduction, no guidance, just a dismissive wave toward the section where spare parts gathered dust. She wasn't on the roster for advanced certification. Her application had been mysteriously delayed for the third consecutive month. And when the instructor called roll that morning, her name was skipped entirely, as if she simply didn't exist. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But at precisely 2:47 p.m., something shifted. The door to the armory opened with authority, and footsteps echoed across concrete with unmistakable purpose. A figure emerged who carried respect without demanding it, whose presence commanded attention without raising their voice. Files were retrieved, schedules were reconsidered. And in that moment, everything changed. Margaret Chen arrived at Precision Firearms Training Academy 45 minutes before the morning session began. The industrial warehouse buzzed with the familiar sounds of preparation, metal components clicking together, compressed air hissing through pneumatic tools, and the steady hum of fluorescent lights overhead. She pushed through the heavy glass doors, her canvas messenger bag slung across her shoulder, containing notebooks filled with hand-drawn diagrams and mechanical specifications she'd studied for months. The facility stretched across 15,000 square feet of converted manufacturing space. Workbenches lined the walls in precise rows, each equipped with vises, torque wrenches, and organized tool sets. Digital calipers gleamed under task lighting. Parts bins contained springs, pins, and components sorted by function and size. The air carried the sharp scent of gun oil and the metallic tang of machined steel. Margaret walked purposefully toward the registration desk, her footsteps echoing against polished concrete. She wore practical clothes, dark jeans without embellishments, a long-sleeved cotton shirt, and steel-toed boots that had seen years of workshop use. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, secured with a plain elastic band. No jewelry, no makeup, nothing that might catch on moving parts or interfere with precise manual work. The registration clerk, a young man with freshly pressed tactical clothing and a clipboard full of official forms, looked up with practiced disinterest. His name tag read Derek in block letters. He scanned the list twice before shaking his head with theatrical confusion. "Chun, Margaret," she said clearly, spelling her last name. "I'm registered for the Advanced Assembly and Modification course." Derek's pen tapped rhythmically against his clipboard. "I'm not seeing you on today's roster. Are you sure you signed up for the right date?" Margaret reached into her bag and withdrew a confirmation email printed on crisp white paper. The header displayed the Academy's logo alongside her registration. Number and payment receipt. Course title: Advanced AR-15 Assembly, Modification, and Troubleshooting. Date: today. Time: 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. "This is my third attempt to attend this course," she explained patiently. "The first 2 sessions were canceled due to what your office called scheduling conflicts. I've already paid the full fee." Derek examined the paper with exaggerated thoroughness, holding it at arm's length as if the text might reveal hidden meaning. Behind him, other students gathered in loose clusters, their conversation mixing technical jargon with casual banter. Most wore expensive tactical gear, multi-pocket vests, combat boots, and shirts bearing logos of firearm manufacturers or training academies. "Well," Derek said finally, "I suppose we can find you a spot in the back. But understand that this is an advanced course. We move fast. If you can't keep up, there won't be time for extra explanations." Margaret nodded once and accepted the visitor badge he reluctantly produced. The temporary sticker read "Observer" in red letters, despite her paid registration for full participation. She clipped it to her shirt collar without protest and moved toward the main training area. The instructor's voice carried across the room with practiced authority. Thomas Brennan stood at the front of the class, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was a man in his early 50s with graying temples and calloused hands that spoke of decades working with precision machinery. His resume, displayed prominently on the Academy's website, included 22 years as a military armorer, certification from multiple firearms manufacturers, and recognition as a master-level gunsmith. Today we're covering complete AR-15. Assembly from individual components, Brennan announced, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. This isn't about following instructions. It's about understanding the mechanical relationships between parts. How tension affects function. How tolerances impact reliability. How modifications change performance characteristics. Margaret found an empty workbench in the back corner, exactly where Derek had indicated. The surface was scarred from years of use, with small burns from soldering irons and stains from various lubricants. The tool set was incomplete. A few screwdrivers with worn handles, a pair of needle nose pliers, and a punch set missing several sizes. No torque wrench, no digital calipers, no specialized AR-15 tools. She opened her messenger bag and quietly supplemented the provided tools with her own. A precision screwdriver set in a leather roll. A digital torque wrench calibrated to exact specifications. Punches and drifts in exact sizes for our 15 pins. A small vise clamp that could be attached to the workbench edge. Each tool was clean, well maintained, and chosen for specific functions. Around her, other students cleaned workbenches closer to the front. Their conversations revealed familiarity with the instructor and previous courses. They spoke casually about trigger modifications, barrel selections, and gas system adjustments. Several wore clothing bearing the logos of firearm manufacturers, suggesting sponsorship or professional affiliations. "Martinez, good to see you back," Brennan called out, nodding toward a man in his 30s wearing a tactical vest covered in patches. "How's that build you were working on last month?" "Running smooth, sir," Martinez replied. That trigger recommendation made all the difference. Crisp break, minimal overtravel. Excellent. We'll build on that today. Brennan's eyes swept the room, cataloging familiar faces and newcomers. When his gaze reached Margaret's corner, it paused briefly before moving on without acknowledgement. The morning session began with component identification. Brennan distributed plastic bins containing AR-15 parts, upper and lower receivers, bolt, carrier groups, charging handles, triggers, springs, and pins. Each bin contained identical components, but the arrangement varied deliberately to test organizational skills. Margaret examined her components methodically. The upper receiver was forged aluminum with a flat-top design for optics mounting. The lower receiver featured a standard trigger guard and magazine well. The bolt carrier group was properly staked and showed signs of quality manufacturing. She arranged the parts in logical assembly sequence, creating groups based on installation, order, and mechanical relationship. At the workbench beside her, a student named Patterson struggled with component identification. He held up a small spring, turning it in the light with obvious confusion. "This little thing goes where exactly?" Margaret glanced over briefly. "That's the disconnector spring. It provides tension for the trigger reset mechanism." Patterson looked surprised. "You know these parts?" "I've studied the technical manuals," Margaret replied simply, returning her attention to her own components. Brennan's voice carried across the room as he began the formal instruction. The AR-15 platform is built around a direct gas impingement system. Gas pressure from the fired cartridge travels through a port in the barrel, down a gas tube, and into the bolt carrier group. This pressure drives the bolt carrier rearward, extracting the spent case and compressing the buffer spring. He demonstrated each component's function using a cutaway training model. The mechanism was clearly visible. gas tube, bolt carrier, buffer spring, and charging handle working in coordinated sequence. Students took notes, asked questions, and handled sample parts under supervision. The key to reliable assembly, Brennan continued, is understanding that tolerance stack-up affects function. Every component has manufacturing variations within acceptable limits. But when you combine multiple parts, those variations can accumulate. A builder needs to recognize when tolerances are approaching limits and make appropriate adjustments. Margaret absorbed this information quietly, cross-referencing it with her previous study. She'd read military technical manuals, manufacturer specifications, and gunsmith reference materials. The theoretical knowledge was solid, but this was her first opportunity to apply it hands-on with complete components. The first assembly exercise began with installing the trigger group into the lower receiver. Brennan demonstrated the process, step by step, explaining the relationship between trigger, disconnector, and hammer. The sequence required precise positioning and careful attention to spring tension. Remember, he cautioned, the trigger pins must be installed from the correct side. The disconnector spring needs proper seating. And the hammer spring legs must be positioned correctly or the system won't function. Students began working. At their benches, the room filled with the sounds of metal components clicking together, punctuated by occasional frustration when parts didn't align properly. Several students raised hands for assistance, receiving individual guidance from Brennan or his assistant. Margaret worked methodically, referring to her notebook for confirmation, but moving with growing confidence. The trigger pin slid into place with a satisfying click. The disconnector spring seated properly on the first attempt. The hammer spring legs aligned correctly, providing proper tension without binding. "Looking good over there," Patterson observed. Watching her progress, "You've done this before." "First time with actual parts," Margaret replied, checking the trigger function with careful finger pressure. The brake was clean, the reset positive. But I've practiced the procedures mentally many times. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 2 workbenches away, another student encountered difficulty. Rodriguez, a man in his 40s wearing an expensive shooting jacket, struggled with the safety selector installation. The detent spring had launched across the room during his first attempt, and his second try resulted in a jam selector that wouldn't rotate. "Need some help with that safety?" Margaret offered quietly. Rodriguez looked up, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool workshop temperature. "This thing keeps binding up. I've installed it 3 times, and it won't turn properly." Margaret approached his workbench and examined the assembly. The safety selector was installed upside down, with the detent spring compressed incorrectly. The selector's cam surfaces were fighting against the spring tension instead of working with it. "The selector needs to be oriented with the safe position at 90 degrees, she explained, demonstrating the correct installation. "The detent spring provides the click you feel when rotating between positions. If it's fighting the movement, the spring isn't seated properly." She guided Rodriguez through the correct installation sequence, showing him how to compress the detent spring with controlled pressure while aligning the selector. The mechanism clicked into place smoothly, rotating between safe and fire positions with proper detent engagement. "Thank you," Rodriguez said gratefully. "I was about to give up and ask for help." Margaret returned to her workbench without seeking recognition. Her own trigger assembly was complete and functioning properly. She moved on to the next step, installing the buffer tube and stock assembly. The buffer tube required precise threading into the lower receiver's rear extension. Too loose, and the stock would have excessive play. Too tight, and the threads might strip under stress. Margaret used her torque wrench to achieve the manufacturer's specified tension, checking the measurement twice for accuracy. Around her, other students worked at varying paces. Some progressed quickly, drawing on previous experience. Others struggled with basic procedures, requiring frequent instructor intervention. The skill levels varied dramatically, from complete beginners to experienced hobbyists. Brennan circulated through the room, observing student progress and offering guidance where needed. His teaching style was direct but patient, correcting errors without making students feel inadequate. He stopped at Margaret's workbench briefly, examining her completed trigger assembly. "Looks like you've got the basics down," he commented, checking the trigger function with a few test pulls. "Good spring tension, proper pin alignment." "Thank you, sir," Margaret replied, continuing with her buffer tube installation. Brennan moved on without further comment, but Margaret noticed his assistant, a younger man named Collins, lingering nearby. Collins watched her work with obvious curiosity, observing her tool selection and assembly techniques. "You're using some different tools than most students," Collins observed. "That torque wrench is professional grade. I believe in using proper tools for precision work," Margaret replied, tightening the buffer tube to specification. "If the job requires specific torque values, approximate tension isn't adequate." Collins nodded approvingly. "Most students rely on feel, which works for casual assembly but isn't sufficient for precision builds. You've obviously prepared for this course." Margaret appreciated the acknowledgement, but remained focused on her work. The buffer tube was installed correctly, the stock attached securely, and the buffer spring properly seated. She moved on to the upper receiver assembly, which required installing the barrel and gas system. The barrel installation was the most critical step, requiring precise alignment and proper torque application. The barrel extension had to thread smoothly into the upper receiver, with the gas port aligned correctly with the gas tube. Margaret used anti-seize compound on the threads and applied steady pressure while rotating the barrel by hand. The barrel wrench, a specialized tool for gripping the barrel extension, allowed her to apply the necessary torque without damaging the barrel surface. She tightened the barrel nut to specification, checking the alignment with precision measuring tools. "Impressive setup," commented a student named Williams, observing Margaret's tool selection. "You came prepared for serious work." "Preparation reduces errors," Margaret replied, checking the barrel's headspace with go-no-go gauges. "These measurements affect both safety and accuracy." Williams nodded but seemed puzzled by her methodical approach. Most students in the class relied on visual inspection and approximate measurements, trusting their experience to identify problems. Margaret's use of precision tools suggested a different philosophy: verify everything, assume nothing. The gas system installation required careful attention to the gas tube length and alignment. The gas tube had to slide freely through the gas block while maintaining proper positioning relative to the barrel's gas port. Margaret used a gas tube pin to secure the connection, ensuring the tube wouldn't shift during operation. As the morning session progressed, the skill differences among students became more apparent. Some worked quickly and confidently, their hands moving with practiced efficiency. Others struggled with basic procedures, requiring frequent assistance from instructors. A few students, including Margaret, worked methodically but showed obvious competence with the technical aspects. "Remember," Brennan announced to the class, "we're building functional firearms, not decorative props. Every component must be installed correctly and function reliably. A mistake in assembly can result in dangerous malfunction." Margaret tested her gas system installation by manually cycling the bolt carrier group. The action was smooth, with proper gas tube alignment and no binding. The bolt locked back correctly when the magazine was empty, and the charging handle operated with appropriate resistance. During the lunch break, students gathered in small groups to discuss their progress and compare techniques. Margaret remained at her workbench, using the time to review her notes and prepare for the afternoon session. She ate a simple sandwich while studying component specifications and assembly tolerances. Patterson approached her workbench carrying a cup of coffee. "You're not joining the others for lunch?" "I prefer to use the time for review," Margaret replied, flipping through her notebook. "The afternoon session covers more advanced topics." "You seem to know this stuff pretty well," Patterson observed. "Have you taken other courses here?" Margaret looked up from her notes. "This is my first hands-on training. I've studied the technical aspects extensively, but practical application is different from theoretical knowledge." "Well, you're doing better than most of us," Patterson said. "That help you gave Rodriguez earlier saved him a lot of frustration." Margaret nodded politely but returned to her preparation. She reviewed the afternoon's scheduled topics: advanced trigger modifications, barrel timing, and gas system adjustments. Each subject required specific knowledge and careful attention to detail. The afternoon session began with a discussion of trigger modifications. Brennan explained how different trigger components affected pull weight, travel distance, and reset characteristics. He demonstrated various trigger upgrades, from simple spring changes to complete replacement units. A quality trigger can dramatically improve a rifle's accuracy, Brennan explained, but modifications must be done carefully. Reducing pull weight too much can create safety issues. Eliminating creep entirely can affect reliability. The goal is optimization, not extreme modification. Margaret listened intently, taking detailed notes about trigger geometry and spring relationships. She'd read about these concepts but had never seen them demonstrated with actual components. The visual explanation clarified several points that had been unclear in her theoretical study. The exercise involved installing a drop-in trigger unit, which required removing the original trigger components and replacing them with a pre-assembled module. The process tested students' ability to work with small parts and precise tolerances. Margaret disassembled her original trigger group carefully, organizing the components in logical order for potential reinstallation. The drop-in unit was more complex, with additional springs and adjustment screws. She studied the installation instructions thoroughly before beginning the procedure. The trigger unit slid into place smoothly, with the pins aligning properly. On the first attempt, Margaret tested the function carefully, checking pull weight and reset characteristics. The improvement was immediately noticeable: cleaner break, shorter travel, and more positive reset. "That's a significant improvement," Collins observed, testing Margaret's trigger installation. "Good work on the alignment." Around the room, other students experienced varying degrees of success. Some struggled with the pin installation, requiring multiple attempts to achieve proper alignment. Others had difficulty with the trigger adjustment screws, creating inconsistent pull weights or unreliable reset. Rodriguez approached Margaret's workbench again, holding his partially assembled trigger unit. "I'm having trouble with these adjustment screws. Every time I think I have it right, something changes." Margaret examined his installation, noting several issues with screw positioning and spring tension. "The adjustment screws interact with each other," she explained. "Changing one affects the others. You need to establish a baseline setting and make small adjustments incrementally." She guided Rodriguez through the proper adjustment sequence, showing him how to achieve consistent results through systematic testing. The process required patience and attention to detail, but the final result was a trigger with smooth operation and reliable function. "You're a natural teacher," Rodriguez commented. "Have you considered instructing?" Margaret smiled slightly. "I enjoy helping others learn, but my primary interest is in the mechanical aspects, understanding how things work and how to make them work better." The final exercise of the day involved complete rifle assembly under time pressure. Students had to disassemble their completed rifles completely, then reassemble them within a specified time limit. The exercise tested both technical knowledge and procedural efficiency. Brennan announced the rules. You have 45 minutes to complete disassembly and reassembly. The rifle must function properly, with all components correctly installed. Time starts when I give the signal. Students organize their workbenches, arranging tools, and preparing workspace for efficient workflow. Margaret reviewed her assembly sequence mentally, visualizing each step and identifying potential bottlenecks. "Begin," Brennan announced. Margaret worked with calm efficiency, disassembling her rifle in logical order. Each component was placed in a specific location, maintaining organization throughout the process. Her movements were deliberate, but not rushed, prioritizing accuracy over speed. The disassembly proceeded smoothly. Stock removed, buffer tube disconnected, trigger group extracted, barrel removed from upper receiver. Each step was completed correctly on the first attempt, with no false starts or corrections needed. Around her, other students worked at varying paces. Some rushed through the disassembly, creating confusion when components weren't properly organized. Others moved cautiously, checking each step multiple times and falling behind the time limit. Margaret began reassembly with the same methodical approach. The trigger group went together smoothly, with proper spring tension and pin alignment. The buffer tube threaded cleanly into the lower receiver. The stock attachment was secure and properly positioned. The upper receiver assembly required more attention, with the barrel installation being the most time-consuming step. Margaret used her torque wrench to ensure proper tightness, checking the measurement twice for accuracy. The gas system aligned correctly, with the gas tube sliding freely through the gas block. With 15 minutes remaining, Margaret completed the final connections between upper and lower receivers. The pivot pins slid into place without resistance, and the rifle cycled smoothly when she tested the action. All functions operated correctly: trigger, safety, bolt hold open, and charging handle. She raised her hand to signal completion, making her the third student to finish within the time limit. Brennan approached her workbench for the final inspection, checking each component systematically. "Trigger function?" he asked, testing the pull weight and reset. "Clean break, positive reset," Margaret replied. "Safety operation? Smooth rotation, proper detent engagement. Bolt hold open function? Engages correctly with empty magazine. Releases with bolt catch." Brennan nodded approvingly. "Good work. Everything functions as designed." Margaret felt a quiet satisfaction in completing the exercise successfully. The rifle was assembled correctly, within the time limit, with all components functioning properly. More importantly, she understood each step of the process and could explain the technical reasons behind each procedure. As other students finished their assemblies, Brennan provided feedback on common errors and areas for improvement. Several rifles failed the function test due to incorrect assembly, requiring troubleshooting and correction. A few students didn't complete the reassembly within the time limit, leaving partially assembled rifles on their workbenches. "The purpose of this exercise," Brennan explained, "is to demonstrate the importance of understanding the mechanical relationships between components. When you truly understand how something works, you can assemble it efficiently and correctly, even under pressure." Margaret packed her tools carefully, organizing each item in its designated location within her bag. The day had been educational and challenging, providing practical experience to supplement her theoretical knowledge. She felt more confident in her abilities and better prepared for advanced applications. As students began filing out of the facility, Collins approached Margaret's workbench. "You showed good technical knowledge today. Have you considered more advanced courses?" "I'm interested in precision building and accuracy modifications," Margaret replied. "But I understand. Those courses have limited enrollment." "They do," Collins agreed. "But students with your technical background would be good candidates. I'll mention your performance to the course coordinator." Margaret thanked him and finished packing her bag. As she prepared to leave, she noticed Derek at the registration desk, updating student records on his computer. She approached to confirm her completion certificate would be processed correctly. "Everything went well today," she told Derek. "I'd like to ensure my completion status is recorded properly." Derek looked up from his computer, his expression showing mild surprise. "You actually finished the course? I thought you were just observing." "I was registered for full participation," Margaret replied patiently. "I completed all exercises and passed the final assessment." Derek scrolled through his records, eventually locating Margaret's file. "I see you're listed here. The instructor will need to confirm your completion status before I can process the certificate." Margaret nodded and waited while Derek contacted Brennan for verification. The conversation was brief, with Brennan confirming her successful completion of all course requirements. Derek updated her record and printed a completion certificate. "There you go," Derek said, handing her the certificate. "You're now qualified for intermediate and advanced courses." Margaret examined the certificate briefly before placing it in her bag. The document represented more than just course completion. It validated her technical knowledge and practical skills. More importantly, it qualified her for the advanced courses she'd been hoping to attend. As she walked toward the exit, Margaret reflected on the day's experiences. She'd demonstrated competence in a demanding technical environment, helped other students succeed, and earned recognition for her skills. The path forward was clearer now, with opportunities for advanced training and specialized applications. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Margaret reached her vehicle. She placed her bag in the back seat and sat quietly for a moment, processing the day's events. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but today had been a significant step forward in her technical development. She started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, already planning her next steps. The Advanced Precision Building course was scheduled for next month, and she intended to be ready for whatever challenges it might present. Today had proven that preparation, persistence, and technical knowledge could overcome skepticism and earn respect in any environment. The facility grew smaller in her rearview mirror, but the lessons learned and confidence gained would stay. With her, she'd proven something important today, not just to the instructors and other students, but to herself. Technical competence spoke louder than assumptions, and results mattered more than appearances. Margaret Chen drove home with quiet satisfaction, knowing she'd taken another step toward mastering the technical skills that fascinated her. The road ahead promised more challenges, but she was ready to meet them with the same methodical approach and dedication that had served her well today. The following Tuesday brought unexpected news. Margaret checked her email during her morning coffee and found a message from the Academy's Advanced Training Coordinator. The subject line read, "Special Assessment Opportunity, Confidential." She opened the message carefully, reading each line twice to ensure she understood correctly. The Academy was hosting a demonstration for potential government contractors, showcasing their training methods and student capabilities. They needed volunteers to participate in advanced skill assessments that would be observed by representatives from federal agencies and military procurement offices. The email emphasized the voluntary nature of participation and the confidential nature of the evaluation. Students who volunteered would be testing experimental training protocols designed to push beyond conventional skill boundaries. The assessment would take place the following week, during a closed session with no outside observers except the evaluating officials. Margaret responded immediately, confirming her availability and interest in participating. The coordinator replied within an hour, providing additional details and scheduling information. She was assigned to report to the Academy's Advanced Training Wing, a section of the facility she'd never accessed before. The week passed slowly as Margaret prepared for the unknown assessment. She continued her regular study routine, reviewing technical manuals and practicing assembly procedures with her own components at home. She had no idea what specific challenges awaited, but her preparation philosophy remained consistent. Understand the principles, practice the procedures, and trust in methodical execution. Friday morning arrived gray and overcast with low clouds, hanging over the industrial district where the academy was located. Margaret arrived earlier than usual, noting several unfamiliar vehicles in the parking lot. Black sedans with government plates sat alongside military-style vehicles bearing official markings. The main entrance had been secured with additional personnel, and students were being directed to a side entrance leading to the advanced wing. Margaret presented her identification to a serious-faced security officer who checked her name against a classified list before waving her through. The advanced wing felt different from the main training facility. The corridors were quieter, with thicker carpeting and more sophisticated lighting. Display cases lined the walls, showcasing precision firearms and advanced optical equipment. The atmosphere suggested serious professional work rather than casual training. Margaret followed signs directing her to Conference Room C, where she found a small group of students waiting in uncomfortable silence. She recognized a few faces from previous courses, but most were strangers. Everyone seemed nervous, uncertain about what they'd volunteered for. At precisely 8 o'clock, the door opened and Thomas Brennan entered, followed by two individuals in business attire. Brennan's demeanor was more formal than usual, his expression serious and focused. He carried a clipboard and moved with the purposeful efficiency of someone operating under strict protocols. "Good morning," Brennan began, his voice carrying easily through this small room. "Thank you all for volunteering for this assessment. What you're about to participate in is part of an ongoing evaluation of advanced training methodologies. The results will be used to determine the effectiveness of unconventional skill development approaches." He gestured toward the two observers. "These gentlemen represent agencies that are interested in the practical applications of accelerated learning techniques. They'll be observing and documenting your performance, but they won't interfere with the assessment process." Margaret studied the observers discreetly. Both appeared to be in their 40s, with the alert bearing of experienced professionals. They carried notebooks and recording devices, and their attention was completely focused on Brennan's briefing. "The assessment consists of 3 phases," Brennan continued. "Each phase is designed to test different aspects of technical skill and adaptability. You'll be working individually, and your performance will be evaluated against specific criteria that I'm not at liberty to discuss in advance." He paused, scanning the faces of the assembled students. "I want to emphasize that this is entirely voluntary. If anyone feels uncomfortable proceeding, you're free to leave now without any negative consequences." No one moved. The room remained silent except for the soft hum of ventilation systems. "Very well," Brennan said. "Please follow me to the assessment facility." They walked through a series of corridors Margaret had never seen before, passing laboratories and workshops equipped with sophisticated machinery. Through open doorways, she glimpsed precision measurement equipment, computer-controlled manufacturing, tools, and testing apparatus she couldn't identify. The assessment facility was a large, windowless room with industrial lighting and concrete floors. Workbenches were arranged in a grid pattern, each equipped with identical tool sets and component bins. Large screens mounted on the walls displayed timing information and assessment criteria. "Phase 1, Brennan announced, is a baseline evaluation of your current assembly skills. You'll have 30 minutes to complete a standard AR-15 assembly from components. This establishes your normal performance level under observation." Margaret was assigned to Workstation 7, located in the middle of the room where the observers would have clear sight lines. She examined the provided tools and components, noting that everything was standard equipment, similar to what she'd used in previous courses. The component bin contained all necessary parts for a complete rifle assembly: upper and lower receivers, barrel, bolt carrier group, trigger components, stock assembly, and hardware. Everything appeared to be quality components, properly manufactured, and free from obvious defects. Begin when ready, Brennan instructed. Margaret started with the lower receiver assembly, installing the trigger group with practiced efficiency. Her movements were smooth and confident, each step flowing naturally into the next. The observers watched intently, making notes on their clipboards, but remaining silent. She completed the lower receiver assembly in 12 minutes, including the buffer tube and stock installation. The upper receiver followed, with the barrel installation requiring the most precision. Margaret used proper torque specifications and alignment procedures, checking her work twice before proceeding. The complete assembly was finished in 24 minutes, well within the allotted time. Margaret tested all functions systematically: trigger operation, safety engagement, bolt hold open function, and charging handle action. Everything operated smoothly and correctly. Brennan inspected her completed rifle, checking the same functions Margaret had tested. He nodded approvingly and recorded her completion time on his clipboard. Around the room, other students were at various stages of completion, some struggling with specific procedures. Phase 2, Brennan announced when all students had finished, introduces an environmental challenge. You'll be completing the same assembly task under modified conditions designed to test your adaptability. Margaret felt a flutter of nervousness as Brennan produced a black cloth blindfold from a storage cabinet. The observers leaned forward with obvious interest, their pens poised over their notebooks. You'll be assembling an AR-15 while blindfolded, Brennan explained matter-of-factly. This tests your understanding of component relationships and your ability to work through touch and spatial memory rather than visual confirmation. The room fell silent as students absorbed this information. Margaret felt her heart rate increase slightly, but her mind was already adapting to the challenge. She'd memorized the assembly procedures thoroughly, and her hands were familiar with the feel and weight of each component. You'll have 45 minutes for this phase, Brennan continued. The same completion standards apply. The rifle must be fully functional with all components properly installed. Margaret watched as other students reacted to the announcement. Some looked confident, drawing on their experience with familiar procedures. Others appeared worried, realizing that visual assembly relied heavily on sight for confirmation and guidance. "Miss Chen," Brennan called, consulting his clipboard. "You're first." Margaret approached the designated workstation, noting that it had been cleared of unnecessary items. Only the essential tools and components remained, arranged in a logical pattern she could memorize before the blindfold was applied. She spent several minutes studying the layout, creating a mental map of tool locations and component positions. The socket wrench was positioned at 2 o'clock relative to the receiver. The punch set lay parallel to the workbench edge. The component bins were arranged in assembly order from left to right. "Ready when you are," Brennan said, holding the blindfold. Margaret nodded and closed her eyes as the black cloth was secured over her vision. The world disappeared into complete darkness, leaving only the sounds of the room and the feeling of the workbench under her hands. She began by orienting herself to the workspace, running her hands along the edge of the workbench to establish reference points. The component bins were exactly where she'd memorized them. The tools remained in their designated positions. Margaret picked up the lower receiver, feeling its familiar weight and contours. Her fingers traced the trigger guard, magazine well, and pinholes, confirming the proper orientation. She reached for the trigger group components, identifying each piece by touch. The trigger itself was easily recognizable by its curved shape and pivot hole. The disconnector was smaller, with a distinctive hook at one end. The hammer was heavier, with spring posts extending from its base. Margaret arranged these components in assembly order, using touch to maintain spatial awareness. Installing the Trigger required careful positioning of the spring and proper alignment of the pinholes. Margaret worked slowly, feeling for the correct relationships between parts. The spring tension provided feedback about proper installation, and the smooth pin insertion confirmed correct alignment. She moved methodically through each step, relying on her understanding of mechanical relationships rather than visual confirmation. The disconnector required precise positioning relative to the trigger, with its spring providing the correct tension for proper function. The hammer installation was more complex, requiring coordination between the hammer itself, its spring, and the trigger components already in place. Margaret felt for the spring legs, ensuring they were positioned correctly before installing the hammer pin. Around her, she could hear other students working at their stations, some moving confidently while others struggled with the unfamiliar challenge. The observers remained silent, but she could sense their attention focused on the various workstations. Margaret completed the trigger group assembly and tested its function by feel. The trigger moved smoothly through its travel, with a clean break and positive reset. The hammer fell with proper force when the trigger was pulled, and the safety engaged correctly in both positions. The buffer tube installation required careful threading to avoid cross-threading the receiver extension. Margaret started the threads by hand, turning the tube slowly until she felt it catch properly. She used the appropriate wrench to tighten it to specification, counting turns to gauge the proper torque. The stock assembly was straightforward, with the locking mechanism engaging positively when properly aligned. Margaret tested the adjustment, ensuring the stock moved smoothly between positions and locked securely at each setting. Moving to the upper receiver, Margaret began the more challenging barrel installation. The barrel extension had to thread smoothly into the receiver, with the gas port positioned correctly for the gas tube alignment. She started the threads carefully, using light pressure and slow rotation to ensure proper engagement. The barrel nut required significant torque, applied with a specialized wrench that engaged notches in the nut's exterior. Margaret positioned the wrench carefully, feeling for proper engagement before applying pressure. The nut tightened gradually, with the threads drawing the barrel firmly into the receiver. Gas tube installation required precise alignment between the gas block and the upper receiver. Margaret felt for the gas port in the barrel, confirming its position before installing the gas block. The gas tube had to slide freely through both components, while maintaining proper angular relationship. The bolt carrier group was the final major component, requiring careful insertion into the upper receiver. Margaret checked the bolt's orientation, ensuring the extractor was positioned correctly and the gas rings were properly seated. The charging handle provided the interface for manual operation, sliding into its track with smooth precision. Connecting the upper and lower receivers required aligning the pivot pin holes, while managing the spring tension from the buffer system. Margaret felt for the proper positioning, using the trigger guard as a reference point for correct angular relationship. The front pivot pin slid into place with a satisfying click, followed by the rear takedown pin. Margaret tested the connection by opening and closing the action, confirming that both pins were properly seated and the receivers aligned correctly. She performed a complete function check by feel, testing each system methodically. The trigger operated smoothly, the safety engaged positively, and the bolt hold open function worked correctly. The charging handle moved freely, and the action cycled properly when operated manually. "Time," Margaret announced, raising her hand to signal completion. Brennan approached her workstation and removed the blindfold. The sudden return of vision was momentarily disorienting, but Margaret's eyes adjusted quickly to the workshop lighting. She looked down at her completed assembly, seeing for the first time what she had built entirely by touch. The rifle was properly assembled, with all components correctly positioned and securely installed. Brennan performed his own function check, testing each system thoroughly. Everything operated as designed, with no binding, misalignment, or malfunction. "Excellent work," Brennan said, recording her completion time. 32 minutes fully. Functional assembly. Margaret felt a surge of quiet satisfaction as she stepped away from the workstation. The challenge had pushed her beyond her comfort zone, but her preparation and understanding of the mechanical principles had carried her through successfully. The other students took their turns at the blindfolded assembly with varying degrees of success. Some completed the task smoothly, demonstrating similar mastery of the procedures. Others struggled significantly, requiring multiple attempts to achieve proper component alignment. One student, Rodriguez from her previous course, encountered serious difficulty with the trigger group assembly. His first attempt resulted in a jammed trigger that wouldn't release the hammer. His second try produced a safety that wouldn't engage properly. Margaret watched sympathetically as Rodriguez struggled with the unfamiliar challenge. Working by touch required a different kind of understanding than visual assembly, and not everyone adapted easily to the change. Phase 3, Brennan announced when all students had completed their attempts, introduces a time pressure element. You'll be repeating the blindfolded assembly, but with a shortened time limit designed to test your efficiency under stress. Margaret felt her competitive instincts engage as Brennan explained the final challenge. 20 minutes to complete a blindfolded assembly that had taken her 32 minutes in the previous phase. The time reduction was significant, requiring not just accuracy but speed. The same quality standards apply, Brennan emphasized. A partially assembled rifle, or one with functional problems, will not be considered a successful completion, regardless of time. Margaret studied the workstation setup again, looking for opportunities to improve her efficiency. The component layout could be optimized slightly, with frequently used tools positioned for quicker access. She also considered her assembly sequence, identifying steps that could be combined or streamlined. The observers had moved closer to the workstations, clearly recognizing this phase as the most challenging. Their notebooks were filled with detailed observations, and several had produced cameras to document the proceedings. "Miss Chen," Brennan called again. "You're first up for the final phase." Margaret approached the workstation with increased focus, knowing that success would require perfect execution of her planned procedures. She spent several minutes reorganizing the tool and component layout, creating an optimized workspace for maximum efficiency. The blindfold was applied again, returning her to the world of touch and spatial memory. This time, however, she moved with greater confidence, her hands already familiar with the workspace from the previous attempt. Margaret began the assembly immediately, bypassing her earlier cautious approach in favor of swift, decisive movements. The trigger group came together quickly, her fingers finding each component without hesitation. The mechanical relationships were clear in her mind, allowing her to work with growing speed. The buffer tube installation was completed in minutes, rather than the careful process she'd used previously. The stock assembly followed immediately, with no wasted motion or uncertainty about positioning. Moving to the upper receiver, Margaret maintained her accelerated pace while preserving the precision required for critical alignments. The barrel installation required care despite the time pressure, and she forced herself to maintain proper threading procedures. The gas system assembly was streamlined by her improved understanding of the spatial relationships. The gas tube slid into position smoothly, and the gas block alignment was achieved on the first attempt. Margaret's hands moved with increasing confidence as the assembly neared completion. The bolt carrier group insertion was smooth and precise, followed immediately by the charging handle installation. The upper and lower receivers came together quickly, with both pins seating properly. "Time," she called out, completing the function check just as her internal clock suggested 20 minutes had elapsed. Brennan removed the blindfold and began his inspection immediately. Margaret watched nervously as he tested each function. Knowing that any error would invalidate her completion, regardless of the time achieved, the trigger operated perfectly. The safety engaged positively in both positions. The bolt hold open function worked correctly, and the charging handle moved smoothly through its full travel. Every system functioned as designed. 18 minutes 47 seconds, Brennan announced. Fully functional assembly. Margaret felt a wave of accomplishment wash over her as the observers made detailed notes about her performance. She had not only completed the most challenging phase, but had done so faster than the allotted time, while maintaining perfect quality standards. The remaining students attempted the final phase with mixed results. Several completed functional assemblies within the time limit, demonstrating impressive skill under pressure. Others fell short of either the time requirement or the quality standards, producing incomplete or malfunctioning rifles. As the assessment concluded, Brennan gathered the students for a brief debriefing. His expression was professional, but showed hints of satisfaction with the overall performance levels demonstrated. Today's assessment has provided valuable data about the effectiveness of advanced training methodologies, he said. Your participation has contributed to research that may influence future training programs and certification standards. The observers approached individual students for brief conversations, asking questions about their background and training experience. When they reached Margaret, their interest was clearly heightened by her performance in the final phase. "Miss Chen," the older observer said, "your completion time in the final phase was exceptional. Can you tell us about your background and training experience?" Margaret answered their questions honestly, describing her self-directed study and hands-on practice. She mentioned her fascination with mechanical systems and her methodical approach to learning complex procedures. "Have you considered advanced applications for these skills?" the second observer asked. "There are opportunities in specialized fields that might interest someone with your capabilities." Margaret expressed interest but avoided committing to anything specific. She sensed that these men represented serious opportunities, but she wanted to understand more about what they might entail before making any decisions. The observers exchanged business cards with several students, including Margaret. The cards were simple, with only names and phone numbers printed on plain white stock. No company names or titles were visible. As the group began to disperse, Brennan approached Margaret privately. His expression was thoughtful, and he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "That was impressive work today," he said. "Both the technical execution and the adaptability under pressure. Have you given thought to where you want to take these skills?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "I'm interested in precision, applications, and advanced modifications. Today showed me that I have capabilities I hadn't fully tested before." Brennan nodded. "There are opportunities for people with your combination of technical knowledge and practical skill. Not everyone can work effectively under the conditions you experience today." He handed her a different business card, this one bearing the Academy's logo, but with a handwritten note on the back. "If you're interested in exploring advanced opportunities, contact this number. Ask for Dr. Patricia Wells and mention that I recommended you." Margaret studied the card carefully before placing it in her wallet. Another door was opening, leading to possibilities she hadn't imagined when she first arrived at the Academy months earlier. "Thank you," she said. "I'll definitely follow up on this." Brennan smiled slightly. "I think you'll find the conversation interesting. Dr. Wells works with applications that go well beyond conventional training programs." As Margaret gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, she reflected on the day's events. The assessment had pushed her beyond her previous limits, demonstrating capabilities she hadn't fully realized she possessed. More importantly, it had opened pathways to advanced opportunities that might not have been available through conventional channels. The drive home gave her time to process the experience and consider her next steps. The business cards in her wallet represented connections to a world she was only beginning to understand, where technical excellence was valued and advanced skills were applied to challenging problems. Margaret arrived home with a sense of anticipation about the future. Today had been a test, but it felt more like a beginning than an ending. The skills she'd developed through patient study and methodical practice were proving to have applications she'd never imagined. She spent the evening reviewing the day's events and planning her follow-up actions. The conversation with Dr. Wells would be her first priority, but she also wanted to continue developing her technical capabilities through additional training and practice. The blindfolded assembly had been a revelation, demonstrating that her understanding of mechanical relationships was deeper than she'd realized. Working without visual confirmation had forced her to rely on spatial memory and tactile feedback, skills that might prove valuable in other challenging applications. Margaret went to bed that night with questions about where her path might lead, but with confidence that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The assessment had been a significant milestone, proving her capabilities under demanding conditions and opening doors to advanced opportunities. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, and she was eager to explore them. The phone call came 3 days later, just as Margaret was finishing her morning coffee and reviewing technical specifications for a new optics mounting system. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, belonging to someone accustomed to conducting important business efficiently. "Miss Chen, this is Dr. Patricia Wells. Thomas Brennan suggested I contact you regarding your performance at last week's assessment." Margaret set down her coffee cup and focused completely on the conversation. Dr. Wells spoke with the measured cadence of someone who chose words carefully and expected to be understood clearly. "I'd like to meet with you to discuss some opportunities that might align with your demonstrated capabilities. Are you available for a conversation this afternoon?" They arranged to meet at a coffee shop in the downtown business district, a location Dr. Wells described as neutral ground for preliminary discussions. Margaret spent the rest of the morning researching what little information she could find about Dr. Wells, discovering only that she held advanced degrees in engineering and psychology and was associated with several government research contracts. The coffee shop was busy but not crowded, filled with professionals conducting quiet business meetings. Margaret arrived 15 minutes early and chose a corner table with good sightlines and minimal background noise. She ordered black coffee and reviewed her notes from the assessment while waiting. Dr. Wells appeared precisely on time, a woman in her early 50s with silver hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog details automatically. She wore a conservative business suit and carried a leather portfolio that suggested serious professional purpose. "Miss Chen," Dr. Wells said, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting with me on short notice." They settled into their seats and ordered coffee before Dr. Wells opened her portfolio and withdrew a thin folder. Her movements were economical and purposeful, suggesting familiarity with classified or sensitive materials. "Thomas Brennan provided a detailed report of your performance during the assessment," Dr. Wells began. "Your completion time for the final phase was exceptional, but more importantly, your methodology demonstrated understanding that goes beyond conventional training." Margaret listened carefully, recognizing that this conversation was moving towards something significant. Dr. Wells spoke with the authority of someone who controlled access to opportunities that weren't advertised publicly. "I work with specialized training programs that prepare individuals for applications requiring advanced technical skills under challenging conditions," Dr. Wells continued. "The work involves problem solving in environments where conventional approaches may not be sufficient." She paused to sip her coffee, studying Margaret's reaction. "These aren't typical government positions. They require security clearances, extensive additional training, and commitment to assignments that can be demanding both technically and personally." Margaret felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the implications of what Dr. Wells was describing. This wasn't about civilian training programs or recreational skill development. This was about professional applications where technical excellence could have real-world consequences. "What kind of assignments?" Margaret asked. Dr. Wells smiled slightly. "That depends on your interests and aptitudes. Some involve technical support for operations in challenging environments. Others focus on equipment development and testing. All require the kind of precision and adaptability you demonstrated last week." She withdrew a business card from her portfolio and placed it on the table. "If you're interested in learning more, contact this number within the next week. Ask for Program Coordinator Collins and mention reference code Delta 77. Margaret studied the card, noting its similarity to the ones the observers had distributed. Plain white stock with only a phone number and a generic government seal. "There would be a comprehensive evaluation process," Dr. Wells continued, "including psychological assessment, technical testing, and background investigation. The timeline for completion varies, but successful candidates typically begin advanced training within 6 months. The conversation lasted another 20 minutes, with Dr. Wells answering Margaret's questions, while carefully avoiding specific details about the nature of the work or the organizations involved. Everything remained deliberately vague, but the underlying message was clear: exceptional technical skills open doors to opportunities that didn't exist for average performers. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Wells made one final comment that stayed with Margaret for days afterward. "Most people learn to follow procedures and apply them consistently," Dr. Wells said. "A few learn to understand principles and adapt them to new situations. Even fewer can maintain that adaptability under pressure while preserving precision. You've demonstrated all 3 capabilities." Margaret drove home with her mind racing through possibilities and implications. The business card in her wallet represented a pathway to applications she'd never considered, where her technical skills might serve purposes beyond personal satisfaction or civilian employment. She spent the evening researching government contracting and specialized technical positions, discovering a complex world of classified projects and advanced applications. The information was deliberately limited, but patterns emerged suggesting opportunities for individuals with unique combinations of technical knowledge and practical capability. The decision to pursue Dr. Wells's opportunity required careful consideration. Margaret understood that accepting would likely change the direction of her life significantly, potentially involving commitments and responsibilities she couldn't fully anticipate. She made lists of advantages and disadvantages, researched security clearance requirements, and considered the implications of specialized government work. The technical challenges were appealing, but the lifestyle changes might be substantial. After 3 days of deliberation, Margaret picked up the phone and dialed the number on Dr. Wells's card. The voice that answered was professional but friendly, belonging to someone expecting her call. Program Coordinator Collins speaking. "This is Margaret Chen. Dr. Patricia Wells suggested I contact you regarding reference code Delta 77. "Of course, Miss Chen. We've been expecting your call. I'd like to schedule an initial interview to discuss your background and interests. Are you available next Tuesday afternoon?" The interview was scheduled for the following week at a government office building downtown. Margaret received detailed instructions about parking, security procedures, and required documentation. The formality of the process reinforced her understanding that this was a serious professional opportunity. Tuesday arrived with clear skies and moderate temperatures. Margaret dressed conservatively in business attire and arrived at the specified building 30 minutes early. The lobby was filled with government employees and visitors, all moving with the purposeful efficiency of people conducting important business. Security screening was thorough but routine, with metal detectors and identification verification. Margaret was issued a visitor badge and escorted to an elevator that required a key card for access to upper floors. The interview took place in a conference room with government-issued furniture and minimal decoration. Program coordinator Collins turned out to be a man in his 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly and accurately. "Miss Chen, thank you for your interest in our program. Dr. Wells provided an excellent report of your capabilities, and we'd like to explore how they might align with our current needs." The interview lasted 2 hours and covered Margaret's educational background, work experience, and technical interests in detail. Collins asked thoughtful questions about her motivation for pursuing advanced applications and her willingness to accept challenging assignments. "Our program requires individuals who can work independently while maintaining precise standards under difficult conditions," Collins explained. "The technical aspects are demanding, but the operational requirements can be equally challenging." Margaret answered honestly about her interests and capabilities while acknowledging the limitations of her current experience. She emphasized her commitment to continuous learning and her willingness to accept demanding training requirements. "Based on this conversation and Dr. Wells's recommendation, I'd like to move forward with your application," Collins said. "The next step involves comprehensive testing and evaluation that will take several weeks to complete." He handed her a packet of forms and schedules. "This includes psychological evaluation, technical assessment, and background investigation." Requirements. The process is thorough, but it ensures that both parties understand what they're committing to. Margaret left the interview with mixed feelings of excitement and apprehension. The opportunity was clearly significant, but the evaluation process would test every aspect of her qualifications and suitability for specialized work. The psychological evaluation took place the following week at a private testing facility. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a clinical psychologist specializing in personnel selection, conducted a series of interviews and written assessments designed to evaluate Margaret's emotional stability and decision-making capabilities. This work requires individuals who can maintain performance under stress while making sound judgments in uncertain situations. Dr. Martinez explained, "We need to understand how you respond to pressure and how you process complex information." The testing included cognitive assessments, personality inventories, and scenario-based evaluations. Margaret found herself analyzing hypothetical situations and explaining her reasoning for various decisions. The questions were designed to reveal thinking patterns and stress responses rather than test specific knowledge. Technical assessment followed 2 weeks later at a facility Margaret hadn't seen before. The building was unmarked and located in an industrial area away from main traffic routes. Security was more stringent than the government office, with multiple checkpoints and escort requirements. The testing facility contained sophisticated equipment Margaret had only read about in technical journals. Computer-controlled manufacturing tools, precision measurement devices, and testing apparatus that represented the current state of technological development. Today's assessment will evaluate your ability to work with unfamiliar equipment and adapt to new technical challenges, explained the chief evaluator, a woman introduced only as Ms. Rodriguez. You'll be presented with problems requiring creative solutions and precise execution. The first challenge involved disassembling and analyzing a complex mechanical device Margaret had never seen before. The equipment appeared to be some kind of precision timing mechanism with components machined to extremely tight tolerances. Margaret approached the device methodically, studying its external features before beginning disassembly. She photographed each step and organized components in logical groupings, creating a systematic approach to understanding the mechanism's function. The internal components revealed sophisticated engineering with materials and manufacturing techniques beyond conventional applications. Margaret used precision measuring tools to document critical dimensions and relationships, building a comprehensive understanding of the device's operation. Can you determine the device's intended function? Ms. Rodriguez asked. Margaret studied her notes and measurements carefully before responding. Based on the precision of the timing components and the materials used, this appears to be designed for applications requiring extremely accurate mechanical timing under harsh environmental conditions. Ms. Rodriguez made notes on her evaluation. Form but didn't confirm or deny Margaret's assessment. The testing continued with increasingly complex challenges, each designed to evaluate different aspects of technical capability and problem-solving approach. The second challenge involved modifying a standard piece of equipment to meet specific performance requirements. Margaret was given engineering drawings and specifications, but no detailed instructions about implementation methods. She spent considerable time analyzing the requirements and developing a modification strategy. The changes required precision machining and careful attention to maintaining the equipment's reliability while improving its performance characteristics. Margaret worked with unfamiliar machine tools, learning their operation through experimentation and logical analysis. The precision required pushed her skills to their limits, but her methodical approach allowed her to achieve the specified tolerances. "Excellent work," Ms. Rodriguez commented, examining Margaret's completed modification. "The implementation demonstrates both technical skill and understanding of engineering principles." The final challenge was the most demanding, requiring Margaret to design and build a solution to a problem with minimal guidance. She was given only basic requirements and access to a well-equipped workshop with advanced manufacturing capabilities. Margaret spent hours developing her approach, creating detailed drawings and calculating material requirements. The solution required combining mechanical, electronic, and software components into an integrated system meeting specific performance criteria. The building process tested every skill she'd developed, from precision machining to electronic assembly to software programming. Margaret worked systematically, testing each subsystem before integration and maintaining detailed documentation throughout the process. Her completed solution met all specified requirements and demonstrated capabilities beyond the minimum standards. Ms. Rodriguez's evaluation was thorough, testing the device under various conditions and documenting its performance characteristics. "This level of work demonstrates exceptional capability," Ms. Rodriguez concluded. "Your approach shows both technical competence and the kind of creative problem-solving we value in our program." The background investigation was the most invasive part of the evaluation process. Federal investigators interviewed Margaret's family, friends, former employers, and academic references. They verified every detail of her personal and professional history, looking for anything that might affect her suitability for sensitive work. Margaret cooperated fully with the investigation, providing access to financial records, travel history, and personal relationships. The process was thorough but professional, conducted by investigators who understood the requirements for security. Clearances. 6 weeks after beginning the evaluation process, Margaret received a phone call from Program Coordinator Collins requesting a final meeting to discuss the results. His tone was positive but gave no specific indication of the outcome. They met again in the same conference room where Margaret's journey had begun. Collins carried a thick folder containing the results of all evaluations and assessments. His expression was professional, but showed hints of satisfaction. "Ms. Chen, I'm pleased to inform you that you've successfully completed our evaluation process," Collins began. "All assessments indicate that you possess the technical capabilities and personal characteristics we're looking for in our program participants." Margaret felt relief and excitement wash over her as Collins continued, with specific details about her evaluation results. The psychological assessment had rated her as exceptionally stable and adaptable. The technical evaluation had demonstrated capabilities well above program requirements. "Based on these results, we'd like to offer you a position in our Advanced Technical Support Program," Collins said. The work involves specialized applications of precision technical skills in support of government operations. He outlined the general nature of the work without revealing specific details that would require security clearance. The position involved equipment development, testing, and operational support for projects requiring exceptional technical precision. The training program begins in 6 weeks and lasts approximately 8 months, Collins explained. During that time, you'll receive security clearance and specialized instruction in advanced applications of your technical skills. Margaret accepted the position immediately, understanding that she was embarking on a career path she couldn't have imagined when she first walked into the Firearms Training Academy. Her patient development of technical skills had opened doors to opportunities that few people ever encountered. The weeks before training began passed quickly as Margaret prepared for the next phase of her journey. She completed administrative requirements, underwent additional security screening, and studied materials provided by the program coordinators. Her friends and family were curious about her new position, but accepted her explanation that she was joining a government technical support program requiring security clearance. The details would remain classified, but the opportunity represented the culmination of years of dedicated skill development. On her final day before reporting for training, Margaret returned to the Firearms Academy where her journey had begun. The facility looked exactly as she remembered, but her perspective had changed dramatically. What had once seemed like the pinnacle of technical achievement now appeared to be merely the beginning of possibilities she was still discovering. Thomas Brennan was conducting a basic assembly course when Margaret arrived. She waited outside the classroom until the session ended, then approached him as students were filing out. "Miss Chen," Brennan said with obvious pleasure, "I heard you'd accepted a position with Dr. Wells's program. Congratulations." They talked briefly about Margaret's experience with the evaluation process and her upcoming training. Brennan expressed satisfaction that his recommendation had led to such a positive outcome. "You demonstrated something special during that assessment," Brennan said. "Not just technical skill, but the kind of adaptability that can't be taught. It can only be developed through the right combination of preparation and natural capability." Margaret thanked him for his guidance and support throughout her development. Without his recognition of her potential and willingness to recommend her for advanced opportunities, she might never have discovered what she was capable of achieving. As she prepared to leave, Brennan offered one final observation that stayed with her through the challenging months of training that followed. "The best technical people aren't necessarily the ones who learn procedures fastest," he said. "They're the ones who understand principles so thoroughly that they can adapt to any situation. You've demonstrated that understanding, and now you'll have opportunities to apply it in ways that really matter." Margaret drove home that evening with a profound sense of anticipation about the future. The journey from dismissed observer to selected specialist had required patience, persistence, and unwavering commitment to excellence. But the real journey was just beginning. Her training would push her beyond anything she'd experienced before, involving applications of her technical skills that she couldn't yet imagine. The work would be demanding and sometimes dangerous, requiring the kind of precision and adaptability she'd demonstrated during her assessment. But Margaret was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She'd proven to herself and others that quiet competence could overcome initial skepticism and open doors to extraordinary opportunities. Her methodical approach to learning and unwavering commitment to precision had established a foundation for success in any environment. The path from overlooked student to valued specialist had taught her that recognition must be earned through consistent demonstration of capability rather than demanded through assertion or complaint. Excellence spoke louder than words, and results mattered more than appearances. Margaret's story became legend within the Academy's advanced programs, though few people knew the full details of her subsequent career. Students heard whispers about the quiet woman who'd completed impossible challenges and disappeared into classified programs that recruited only the most exceptional performers. Her example inspired others to pursue excellence for its own sake, understanding that capabilities developed through patient practice might lead to opportunities they couldn't imagine. The lesson was simple but profound. Master the fundamentals, understand the principles, and remain ready for challenges that test every limit. In the years that followed, Margaret's technical skills found applications in projects that helped protect national security and advance technological capability. Her work remained classified, but its impact was felt in improved equipment reliability, enhanced operational effectiveness, and solutions to problems that had challenged others for years. She never forgot the lessons learned during her journey. From dismissed student to valued specialist, precision mattered, preparation was essential, and quiet competence ultimately proved more valuable than loud confidence or impressive credentials. Margaret's story reminded everyone who heard it that true strength often comes disguised as simplicity, that expertise developed through patient practice can overcome any initial disadvantage, and that the most important recognition comes not from applause or awards, but from the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've mastered something that truly matters. Her legacy lived on in the students who learned to value substance over appearance, in the instructors who looked beyond first impressions to identify hidden potential, and in the programs that continued to seek individuals capable of exceptional performance under the most demanding conditions. The woman who had once stood dismissed in the back corner of a training facility had become exactly what she'd always possessed the potential to be, a specialist whose capabilities were limited only by the challenges worthy of her attention. Her journey proved that excellence recognized no boundaries except those imposed by insufficient dedication to achieving it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.